turned on. Nice. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Thank you all for coming to this session. We're talking about merging science and technology with culture and tradition. Culture and tradition being a focus with Native American tribes. And so up here are just a few professors and practitioners that work with tribal utilities. My name's James Temte. I work with the National Tribal Water Center, and so we work nationwide in scope, but our office is in Anchorage, Alaska. So there's quite a few villages up there that still don't have water and sanitation, and so my program, along with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium and the state of Alaska, are working to kind of address those issues. Mari Eggers, she's with Montana State University in Bozeman, and also Little Bighorn College, which is on the Crow Reservation. So she's done a lot of work with unregulated drinking water and developed, along with John Doyle, have developed a program that really provides a lot of education outreach to the community there with well testing and unregulated drinking water issues. And so that's John Doyle as well. He's with Little Bighorn College, and you're a member of the Crow tribe.
I'm a member of the Crow tribe. Mm-hmm.
Yep. All right, and we also have Steve Terry. He's with the United Southeastern Tribes. Yeah, and so they'll all introduce themselves to and provide a little bit more background, but he works with the water utilities and the infrastructure, assisting the tribes in the southeast. And then we have Bruce Robinson. He's with the InterTribal Council of Arizona and also does a lot of work with the utilities in Arizona. So we have some slides just talking about our programs here. So the National Tribal Water Center, we really focus and we strive to protect water culture and preserve water resources for future generations. We partner with tribes nationwide, and our mission is to serve as a culturally appropriate resource to maximize the health and well-being of American Indian and Alaska Native people through water and sanitation. You can see we have kind of a small staff. The dog on the end, he's actually Jake Bell, who did not provide a photo. And so there's myself. John Warren, who is our lead engineer. So we have engineering services we provide, and Bailey, she's an engineer, but also has a master's in education. So she's able to kind of translate a lot of the engineering material into kind of curriculums. Marlea LaBelle, she's a graphic designer, but also has a master's in rural community development. And then Jake Bell is a public health practitioner. Mari and John.
Go ahead, John. Just our story.
So my name is John Doyle. I'm a member of the Crow tribe, and I'm a member of the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee. And what you're seeing there is the committee members. We formed in 2004, and we've been functioning as a board since. And the lower photo is a picture of the Little Bighorn River, and as you see, the kids are in that water. That's our main recreational area. We don't have swimming pools or anything like that, and so the concern with the water in the rivers is just as equally as important as the water that's in our wells and our drinking water lines.
Steve.
Yeah, I'm going to go with podium.
Okay.
Might make it a little easier for me. United South and Eastern Tribes was established in 1969 by 4 tribes in the Southeast. It was the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. It is a nonprofit intertribal organization. It represents 27 member tribes. We just got our 27th tribe added last week, and that is the Pamunkey tribe from Virginia, which is the newest tribe in the United States. So we play a major role. We want to help all our member tribes improve the capabilities of tribal government. We promote Indian leadership, improve the quality of life for American Indians, protect Indian rights, and our guiding principle is of unity. They were formed because they found out that if they had 4 tribes that spoke with one voice, Washington, D.C. and the federal government paid more attention to them. That's why the model is, because there is strength in unity. My office was created in 2004. It was to assist member tribal nations do environmental work, such as clean and safe drinking water, healthy community ecosystems, climate change, traditional practices, and public safety. Next slide. Means you have the clicker. And so this is our office. We do operator certification. We are one of 2 tribal organizations that's approved by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for drinking water, wastewater, and laboratory analysts. Bruce is with the InterTribal Council of Arizona, and they are the other tribal organization that's approved to do that. We provide technical assistance for drinking water and wastewater treatment systems. We have 21 training courses on all sorts of topics that include basic laboratory analysis. We have a very small water systems course, water operator, wastewater operator, fluoride treatment, chemical safety and handling, all sorts of topics. We conduct a tribal utility summit that brings together tribal operators, managers, and tribal leaders. We've been doing this for 8 years. We provide continuing education units to our tribal operators so they can maintain their certifications. And we average about 60 tribal operators from 15 tribes with an average of about 120 people in total attendance. We also provide mentoring to tribal operators. And a little caricature of that person, that's Scott Williams, who's our lead trainer, and that looks just like him.
All right.
Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Robinson. I'm with the InterTribal Council of Arizona. This is our objectives. This is what we do. We're formed back in the 1950s when the tribes got together in Arizona during the era of termination, when the federal government was trying to disband the tribes. And at that point, they decided that they needed to band together as in one organization. So they formed the InterTribal Council of Arizona. We are by the tribes, for the tribes. We represent 21 member tribes in Arizona, and our program has expanded through federal funding to allow us to provide services in EPA regions 5 through 10, which is excluding Illinois, basically everything west of the Mississippi. So USET provides the services in EPA regions 1 through 4 and ITCA in 5 through 10. We do both operator certification and technical assistance to water and wastewater facilities, and that's the program that I manage.
I think you can. So up next we have just kind of provide a little bit of overview of Indian country and kind of what are the numbers, how, you know, because I think a lot of folks, they know there's a lot of tribes and there's a lot of folks in there, but really, what do the statistics look like?
So we put this together from USET to kind of show people that are not familiar with Native American tribes, and we're calling this, you know, Indian country by the numbers. So there's 100 million acres of total landmass under American Indian or Alaska Native control, which would make them the 4th largest state in the Union, behind Alaska, Texas, and California. 42nd, the Navajos would be the 42nd largest state in the Union. 19 numbers of tribal nations that are larger than the state of Rhode Island. 12, there are 12 tribal nations that are larger than the state of Delaware. 40 tribal nations that are within 100 miles of either the Canadian or the Mexican border, are directly accessible by boat from the border. The St. Regis Mohawk tribe in New York actually has a Mohawk reservation in Canada, and they travel back and forth across the St. Lawrence River. 260. miles. Tribal lands share 260 miles of international borders, which is 100 miles longer than what California has with Mexico. There are 567 sovereign tribal nations, tribes, nations, bands, pueblos, communities, and native villages. 334 federally and state recognized American Indian reservations in 2010. 35 states that has a tribal nation within their geographical border. There are 229 tribes in Alaska alone. 338 are located in the lower 48, which is the other 34 states. 104 tribes in California. There are 29 tribes in Washington state. 0 tribes in Tennessee, Kentucky, Georgia, Arkansas, or Missouri, which is kind of amazing, but that's true. 28%, that's how many percentage of Native people that live in poverty in 2010 versus 15% for the nation. 370 treaties between tribes and other governments. Trust responsibility of the U.S. government is a result of these treaties. And I'll turn it back over to James.
So, as a result of the treaties, what is trust responsibility and how does the federal government get involved? Part of the United States responsibility includes carrying out obligations set forth in these treaties. For example, many treaties promise that in exchange for major portions of the tribe's land, the federal government would provide health care and education to the Indians involved in the transaction. So as a result today, tribal members enjoy access of health care and services in their communities provided by the federal government. These services, although provided by the federal government, they're not considered welfare. They are the present-day manifestation of treaty rights, the promise the federal government made to every tribe that was involved in the treaties in exchange for the land that once belonged to the tribes. And so that in itself is how the Indian Health Service and the U.S. government gets brought into the picture of providing water and sanitation in tribal communities. So I think I asked Bruce if he would provide kind of an overview of what water and sanitation currently looks like in Indian country.
It, oh,
You may have to be at the podium.
what, am I using the wrong button here?
Should be that guy.
Okay, all right, awesome. Okay, so I get to show some graphs. This is going to be kind of fun. We have, this is information that was put together by Indian Health Services back in 2013. And it's very important because it demonstrates an inverse relationship where the increase in safe drinking water to tribal homes, you see a responding decrease in gastrointestinal disease and postnatal mortality. This slide is important because the National Congress of American Indians in 2014 developed a resolution expressing the importance of drinking water in Indian country, and it's very powerful. This is the policy arm for Indian country, and I'd like to read it. The need for safe and reliable drinking water and effective wastewater management is fundamental to the health, safety, welfare, economic viability, and self-determination goals of tribal communities throughout Indian country. So in 2002, there was a World Summit. The United States participated. And during that summit, one of the discussions was safe drinking water. And out of the conference, the United States made a commitment to reduce the number of homes without safe drinking water by 50% by the year 2015. So the data carries through to 2015 here, and I think the important things that I would like to show is that hovers around 12 to 15% of homes in Indian country lack safe drinking water. I think we forget about that in the United States. That's a huge number. That's the number of non-Indian homes in the United States that lack safe drinking water. So the disparity is large, and there's been a lot of work done. The Infrastructure Task Force is composed of EPA, United States Department of Agriculture, HUD, Indian Health Services, and this demonstrates the importance of continued funding, which is something we're facing now. So in 2014, the Congressional Natural Resource Committee produced a report, and it further shows the disparity that we're talking about today, with over 660,000 American Indian and Alaska Native men and women lacking access to clean, reliable water sources. This included sanitation, solid waste, and safe drinking water. So that's about 48% of the homes on tribal land. It's a much larger number than what we had seen in the previous slides. This information, this is data coming from the US EPA database, and again, there's a correlation. You see a disparity. In the blue are the number of Safe Drinking Water Act violations in non-Indian country, and the red is in Indian country. And so running average there for Indian country is close to 50%. And the main reason for this, in my mind, is that in Indian country, we're typically dealing with very small or small water systems. And we're dealing with aging infrastructure, and there's a lack of O&M money available to the tribes to continue to keep these treatment systems operating.
All right.
Thanks.
So that sort of sets the stage for our discussion. And so I just have a series of questions I'm going to ask each of you. And so the first question is, what needs or disparities do you see in the work that you're doing with the communities that you serve? And we'll just start with Mari.
Okay, John, why don't you go first and I'll follow you.
Well, we have many of them. One of the disparities that we have is the failure to recognize the cultural importance of our waters. Even though we have surface water plants and home well water that is very important for our water source, we still use the water the way we used it 100 or 200 years ago. We drink that water when there's ceremonies. We use it in ceremonies, and it's very important to us in all aspects of cultural life. And so the disparity that is there is that when decisions are made, our actions are taken, that part is never a part of the discussion. And so as a result, we end up with conflicting issues that never address that. And we tend to forget that we recognize all life, whether it's a human life or the life that lives in that water and lives along its banks. And so to me, that's a disparity that's long overlooked. Maureen?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Just a disclaimer, I'm not a Crow tribal member. I got involved in this when I married a Crow tribal member and followed him back to the reservation and moved into his grandparents' home. Very quickly learned that the well water was only good enough to flush the toilet with. So we lived for years with this multiple water sources situation. And then the community, because I was teaching at the local tribal college, I got recruited by John and others to work with the community on these issues. I would just add to what John's saying. There's this combination, sort of trifecta of greater exposure because of traditional practices in which people are drinking river water untreated in ceremonial practices. The Crow tribe, and we assume other tribes fall into this regulatory gap where the state laws that say require your drinking water treatment plant operators should be certified, that there are well water construction regulations, that septic systems should be permitted. None of those state regulations apply on trust lands, so they're not happening. We don't have certified operators. If your neighbor's septic system has failed and there's sewage running across your property, there's nowhere to turn. There's no one who's going to enforce that. There are people who are straight popping from their homes into the river, and then that river water becomes the drinking water source water for the water treatment plant for the community. Kids are swimming in that same river summer round. So there's this combination of lack of regulation and even greater exposure because of traditional practices and people swimming in the river. And then on top of it, just lack of capacity. We have, you know, it's really improving now, but there aren't enough tribal members with both the cultural and the community background and a bachelor's degree in, you know, hydrology or environmental health or any of these fields that are really needed by the community to be able to manage these issues. So go ahead.
Hey, thanks. I want to emphasize what John was saying, that does not apply just to the Crow Nations, but to all tribal nations. I worked with the National Tribal Water Council, which represented all tribes across this nation. And one thing that I found out very early on is that all tribes have a cultural affinity to water. Water is life to them. And they all use it in their traditions, they use it in their ceremonies, and there's a big cultural attachment to water, which the United States government sometimes does not recognize. Where I work out in the East, most of the tribes that we have drinking water systems, and there's a disparity between these systems. We have tribes that have very sophisticated, progressive systems, and we have tribes that have very small water systems with aging infrastructure that have lead and copper violations and continue to have them. So that's part of the disparity that I see that's happening out there. Plus, as Mary said, we have wells, and these private wells aren't regulated. Your drinking water treatment plant is. EPA regulates that, but there is no regulations for private wells on well construction or any other aspect of that. So that's a big disparity that I see as well.
Thank you. We're going to talk in a little bit about trust responsibility. But I want to preface what I'm going to say with the fact that the federal government has a responsibility, a trust responsibility, a treaty responsibility to help support tribal nations. And most of the tribal infrastructure that has been constructed for water and wastewater is old. It was constructed in the 40s and 50s. And the disparity that I see is that even though the federal government helped construct these water and wastewater plants, they don't support the operation and maintenance of those plants. So imagine being given a shiny new car, but no way to put gas in it or to maintain it. And that's kind of what you have in Indian country. So there's a huge disparity when it comes to the tribes being able to continue to support these facilities and meet the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act.
Thank you, guys. So as you can see, it's a very wide range of issues and complexities that we all deal with and work with. But what solutions have been successful for you guys in your communities? And I love the part where you talked about culture. Each tribe is tied together through water. The water culture in tribes is so strong. And so at the Water Center, that's one thing that we've been able to kind of use with our education and outreach and to create in some of our community interventions. That's the first thing we do is we have a community visioning meeting, and we ask questions like, what is your water culture? And what do you love about your community? And what are the strengths? Because we want to build off our strengths. I think a lot of times we tend to look for deficits, but there's strengths and there's resources within these communities that we can build off of. Mari?
Again, John, why don't you go first?
So the question was the strength?
Yes, what strengths
Successes.
do you
Are the
see?
successes?
Yeah, what solutions have been successful? And also how communities have been involved.
Okay, so, you know, this story of, for us goes back a long time. 1981, when we found that the little Bighorn River was being polluted by our wastewater, failing wastewater system that was built for a different size community and went through floods. So the success that I see is that the awareness and what has happened in that period of time that's to today. There was no place to turn to for answers or solutions or help. All of the federal agencies didn't have enough money to address the needs that we seen and thought were important. And, you know, went through many, many meetings and years of not being able to accomplish anything. 2004, the Crow Environmental Health Steering Committee was formed at Little Bighorn College. And to me, that's a major success. It brought that level of awareness up in our community. And we do have nearly the entire town of Crow Agency's infrastructure replaced, including the lagoon. And so that couldn't have happened without that kind of support that we gathered from that steering committee. And so as far as the community being involved, it's been our policy and practice that everything that we do, you know, we have the discussion amongst ourselves as a steering committee before we take on an issue. Some of our issues are very sensitive culturally, and before we take that next step into how to address it, if we want to make a difference there, we want to know amongst ourselves, what does that mean? Because our actions can affect how we interact with that water. And the community that depends on that water for their cultural needs can be affected by our words. And so we're cautious with how we address that. And it's so important for us to be able to communicate that back to our fellow tribal members. And so one of the things that is so important is that we always have that contact. And that if we are going to visit a home to do well water testing, it's not a one-time visit. It's not 2 times visit. It's always being available for our tribal members. We're a part of the community. They're our relatives in some fashion. And so that constant contact is critical, and that's the successful part for our steering committee.
I would just add to that, steering committee members sometimes one of the things that really keeps us together is at the very beginning of the process, we did this week-long community-wide environmental health assessment with stakeholders from the BIA and Indian Health Service and the college and some of the elders. We went through this whole assessment and discovered there are far more environmental health issues than we ever imagined, but water quality and the risk to health kept rising to the top as the one issue that affected the most people with the highest risk. And so we had that joint consensus about what the community priority was before we started this work, and that has really helped keep us working together even when there could be political divides, you know, within the tribe and among the committee members. We have a common mission. And I would say one of the most successful things has just been, we've been running this home well water testing program. We found that more than half of home wells are unsafe to drink, and the Indian Health Service didn't have this data because they didn't test for arsenic, they never tested for uranium, and although they tested for manganese, it wasn't until recently that we learned higher levels of manganese are neurotoxin, and that's an issue. So all of these homeowners, well owners across the reservation, we heard this again and again, we're told, oh, you have some of the best water in the world. And we now know that half of those wells aren't safe for consumption. And because the secondary contaminants are so serious, it's not cheap to treat. You know, you need an RO unit and a water softener and an iron removal unit, and then you'd have to maintain all of those. What we've ended up doing is providing these water coolers that just take those dispense water from those 5-gallon jugs, which are widely available in the stores. And just by providing the water cooler unit, people can now afford to refill the 5-gallon jugs, and that's, you know, it's not a perfect solution, but it's a workable solution. And one other thing that we feel like is we've really seen a sea change in the last 20 years is by mentoring Crow College students and all of this research and this work, we've seen the majority of them go on and finish their bachelor's degrees, and now the first wave is finishing their graduate degrees. And really, it's you know, since I first moved there in '93, we've seen a sea change in that. You know, our younger college students now know someone who's finished a graduate degree that they may be related to or they know personally, and that's a complete sea change. And we now have a student who's applying to go directly into a PhD program. She's a first. We're really proud of her, but I would really count that as a success. Go ahead.
Okay. In 2004, I was working for the Miccosukee tribe, and I served on the Natural Resources Committee for United South and Eastern Tribes. And the tribes on the committee got together, and that's where our certification program started. This was a tribal program started by tribes for tribes. And we've grown from there. So that's where our operator certification program started, and that is a big success. Training and technical assistance that we offer now to all our tribal members that we have is also very good. We are able to go out to a tribe and provide that on-site personal training to people, to go look at their system and say, what's your issue? We can hopefully come up with a solution for you for that. And we're able to do that as well. I think a big issue that happens with wastewater is the fact now that you can have water quality standards, and EPA just last year changed the requirements for that to make it a lot easier for tribes to get their own water quality standards. Part of that is putting in culture as part of one of your uses of water, so that makes tribes pay more attention to their wastewater discharges to make it safe for their tribal members to continue to do that. I think that's another big success that's out there.
Great. Bruce?
I'm lucky. I get to be the last person, so I get to listen to everything they're saying, and you know, it kind of gets incorporated into my thoughts. And as I'm listening, you know, I realize that there is, for our organization, a couple of key things have made us successful. First is to listen. Take time, don't talk, just listen. The second is to empower. And we empower tribes by helping them be self-sustaining. We provide them with jurisdictionally correct certification. What's that, right? It's certification by a tribal organization for tribal utilities. That's what both of our organizations do, and it's really powerful. So when I think about success in Indian country, it's about education, it's about listening, it's about adapting to your surroundings. One of the problems I see with water and wastewater treatment facilities that are designed by others is they don't bother to go to the community, sit, listen, look, and understand the cultural aspects of the community that they're working for. And the result is that often the designs are flawed. They'll design a treatment plant that for a community of 500 people, but they'll design that treatment plant in normal fashion for 5,000 people, because in 25 years they are assuming that is what's going to be required. The result is that this small community pays an inordinate amount of money in energy utility because they have a plant that is designed for someone else. So listen and empower.
Thanks. So do you have any examples of the importance of demonstrating these impacts to decision makers? Because I know, well, in Indian country you have just a variety of decision makers, but you have like the tribal council, but then you also have the funders and the folks that decide where the funding goes. So do you have any, I guess, examples of the importance of demonstrating this?
So to me, it's reestablishing trust where it may have kind of slipped away. When individuals have no place to turn to and they repeatedly go to a home or to a government office and don't find any way to address their problems, part of us coming into their homes is rebuilding that trust. But it's not only rebuilding that trust in our community, with our community members, it's also building that trust in our tribal governments. Because for a long time, nothing was done. And when Little Bighorn College decided to take on this role, we had to build partners. MSU Bozeman is one of our partners, but we have many partners across the nation now. That's probably one of the best things that's happened, is we have a resource that wasn't there before. But also, when we do have additional issues or problems, and we do have a lot of them, and so being able to go into our tribal government offices and our legislative branch and talk about the issues that are threatening or coming, and then having them act upon the information that we're providing them, that is building that trust in that government, that LBHC, the college, is the place to go for that additional research that's needed.
I think some of the challenges, both meeting tribal needs and priorities and making a difference for just that local homeowner who's got a well, at the same time fulfilling a research mission of whether it's EPA or NIHS with our federal funders, and finding that intersection where we can both do solid research while meeting community needs. And sometimes that's, it's like a Venn diagram of that intersection can be pretty small, and you have to think hard to find that sweet spot, and then have it be something you can actually accomplish and you have the skills to do.
Advocate, advocate, advocate. When I was with the National Tribal Water Council, it took us 3 years, but we got EPA to change the water quality standards rule for tribes. Took me 2 years to get them to realize that by not having a method for tribes to be able to declare their surface waters as impaired, they were allowing states to use rivers that ran through reservations as mixing zones for pollution. So we had to go out and show all of this and keep advocating to EPA, which we did. I didn't say lobby, it's not lobbying, it's you're providing information, and that's what we did. Your other decision makers at the tribal level, your tribal council, your chairman, your governor, your president, whatever your tribal leaders are called, education is key to them. You need to go out and educate them on the importance of utility, what successful management is, how to finance one correctly, and go through all of this. Most tribes, I won't say most, some tribes charge rates for water and wastewater. Some tribes do not charge rates for water and wastewater. Whether they charge or not, they still need to operate that as a business. And most of them are not doing that. They look at it as a function of tribal government. So we go out and try to train them on this is how you need to run your utility. You need to look at this as a business. We just held a workshop on that at St. Regis Mohawk this summer.
And I think you bring up a great point too, just the differences between the tribes. I worked with the Havasupai tribe in Arizona, and so to get there, you hike 7 miles down the Grand Canyon Trail. It was the best work trip of my life. But part of their cultural belief was that if we charge for a natural resource, it's going to go away. And so I was not going to be the person that would say, well, you have to, otherwise you're going to fail. So what we did is we looked at alternative revenue sources that could support the infrastructure. And so there they had tourism as a source to bring in revenue. And so they used some of the funds from the tourism revenue, the tourism, to support the wastewater and water infrastructure. And I think that's something that we can't overlook is tribes' abilities to be creative and to maximize the resources that we do have. Also, the business models are very, they're proven to work in a lot of situations. So, but there is a wide variety of challenges and opportunities. Bruce?
Yeah, the importance of communicating to decision makers. Indian country, we govern typically with tribal councils. And to get up and stand in front and talk in front of a tribal council is a very, very intimidating thing to do. And our utility managers have to do that regularly. They also have to go justify their budgets. So one of the things that has been very useful for my organization and that I've championed within the technical assistance resource that we provide is to help tribal utilities develop asset inventories so they know what their assets are. What are your critical assets? What are the things that you have to repair, rehabilitate, or replace on a regular basis? And then we help them develop asset management plans. And in that asset management plan, it contains a budget, not just a one-year budget, but a 10-year budget. So they can actually now go to their tribal council and demonstrate, hey, I don't just need $100,000 every year to operate. I need $400,000 this year, $200,000 next year. That empowers them. That gives them a partnership with tribal government that strengthens their ties and their ability to manage their resource. So again, it helps them become more self-sustaining. I had a very interesting situation where I produced a tribal asset management plan for a utility manager and when I delivered it to him, he took an imaginary management plan and folded it up and put it in his back pocket. And I said, what is that? He goes, well, we don't charge rates. But the next time that I have to go and justify my budgets to tribal council, I've got that. And it really empowered him.
All right. So I guess the next question is, what strengthens community support? Because I think in the realm of WASH, we need community support because that's how we reach everyone in the community. Is without community support, it's just going to be one person kind of lecturing and telling. So in your experience, what strengthens community support?
I think staying available and not being worried or frightened about going and knocking on doors and going into the home and visiting and being always available no matter where you're at. Not necessarily while you're at work, but wherever you're at, you're available to have a discussion or either point them in a direction of what they need to do or where they need to look for additional help. But if we can help, then being there to do that. And I think that strengthens our community, it builds confidence and trust, but it strengthens all of us that are involved in that too. It's not being shy about talking. That's just key to everything to me. So if we don't communicate, we're guessing or relying on somebody else's word. And a lot of us as Apsalika, we want, if you're coming to talk to us and tell us bad news, come with solutions too. Don't come and tell us that we have problems and then leave us with no solutions or no directions.
I would just say I might even rephrase it. I remember another non-native researcher at my institution asking me, well, this issue I work on, do you think tribes would be interested in working with me on this project? And I said, no, the question is Is that something they want to work on, and can you help them? They're not working with you on your project. You know, don't think about it in that way. So it's really, how do you get academics, how can community members get academic support for what they, you know, what you want to do as community members?
You know, I'll emphasize what John said, accessibility. Being accessible to the community. Just when they need you, you're there. Have an open door policy. Do community outreach. Utilities, drinking water utilities are required to do a consumer confidence report annually. Well, you should hold a meeting to discuss your consumer confidence report and tell everybody what's going on and ask them, what can we do better? What do you think we need to do better? And that's one way that you can get your community support behind you. Go attend cultural events, especially when it relates to water. Make your presence known.
Started a new program this year, Sustainable Management for Small Rural Systems. In that, we go in, we do a one-day workshop for the tribe. And one of the things that we did differently this year is we said, okay, now we're going to come to your utility and we're going to give you this training. But I don't want to do the training for just your utility. I want you to bring in your public accountant. Bring in someone from your water board. Bring in someone from your tribal council. Bring in another department leader that interacts with you on a regular basis. And in doing that, we expanded the communication within the organization. And you get the funniest thing happening. People will start smiling and grinning, and I'll ask an operator, I'll say, well, what are you smiling and grinning about? And they're, well, I never heard my director tell me that before. I didn't know that they felt that way. And then the same thing will happen. The director will start smiling, and he says, well, it's the same thing for me. So when you get community interaction going on, that again empowers the utility, it empowers the people. And that's your opportunity to relate technology and culture. That's your opportunity when you go out and speak with the community members to understand what their aspect, their thoughts are, their cultural knowledge, and to weave the two together so that it is stronger when you're done. So that they have community support and the community feels better about their drinking water. Because what you said was so important. You have so many wells that aren't safe. But try to explain that to a tribal person that looks at that glass of water and says, that water's crystal clear. My family's been drinking it for thousands of years. What do you mean it's not safe? So you have to weave the two thoughts together, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and I would, I guess, as a tribal member, I really have so much respect for researchers that work with us and address some of the needs that we see in our communities. And they do the research and write the manuscripts and write the papers, but it means so much to go back to the community and report the findings and hold that community meeting and let them know what you found and let them know what the recommendations are. I think that's a critical piece that means a lot to me and to other, I think, tribal members that are a part of studies and a part of research. So our last question is, do you guys have any key policy recommendations moving forward?
There's so many things to talk about that for us, what's key to us is how do we strengthen our young people's knowledge, and how do we build that into our education system so that we start at a very young age, and if there's a way to fund those projects at the early age as time goes on, when we're too old to do this work, there'll be people that can continue. And to us, that's critically important that we don't start again by having a whole group or generation not know the things that has been learned over the past 10, 15 years. So policy that I would see is fund education.
two things. Just one, nationally, we need to look at all those areas where state laws that are relevant to wash issues, for which there's not a tribal equivalent, or perhaps there is, but very few tribes are aware of, like their ability to set well construction regulations. Boy, I don't know how many tribes, we didn't have a clue that the tribe had the ability to do that. Look at those gaps and try and address them. And then I would say for those of you who are at universities and you have Native students, see how you can support them, especially your graduate students, and be able to do research in their home communities in a community-engaged way. You know, look at, say, you're set up for graduate committees. You know, would you allow someone who is a tribal elder to be a full member of that graduate committee, even though they may not even have a bachelor's degree? You know, look at ways that you can support your Native students to do this kind of work in their home communities, and what you'd have to change in your university policies to make that happen for them, and funding for these students.
I know Bruce and I are probably going to talk about the same thing, and it's the federal government is very good about going out and building new things. I know a tribe that has a brand new wastewater facility that's been sitting there for 3 years and no houses are hooked up to it. None. Okay? What they'll do is come in and build you a new drinking water treatment plant or a new wastewater treatment plant. Say, here you go, it's all yours, tribe, gone. Won't train operators, won't provide operations and maintenance money, won't do any of those things. So they set tribes up to fail. What they need to do is to start providing some training, like we provide training technical assistance, so does ITCA, but they need to start providing some O&M money to these tribes so they can maintain their facilities and provide safe drinking water and discharge clean water back to the environment.
Show of hands, how many people are over 50? Okay, right. Now let me tell you, in my world, the majority of people put their hands up. Okay? Water and wastewater facilities, the majority of people are going to retire in the next 10 years. Actually, the American Water Works Association number, I think they reduced it to 5. It's a real problem. The real problem. So policy change that I would make would be to have an outreach program to strengthen nationwide, encourage young people to get into this industry. I stopped the other day, I'm leaving home, going back to work at noon, and I stopped my truck and got out of my truck and went and shook hands with the guy that was standing in the street. I said, thank you for what you do. I appreciate you, because as a water operator, it's one of the most important jobs in the world. So to get young people involved in that, to me, it's really dynamic, it's great. We need young people involved, and we need to be careful. There's so much talk about what's going to happen with our federal budget over the next few years. And sorry to bring that up. You probably thought you were going to get away from that today. But the reality is, taking these systems and these utilities and restarting them or refunding them is incredibly inefficient and will be very troublesome. So if there was a policy that I'd like to see, it would be to continue stable funding to water and wastewater utilities in Indian country.
All right. I think that brings us to the end, but we'd love to hear from you guys. It's almost 2 o'clock, but if you have questions, feel free to, if you could, make your way over to one of the mics, and then we can record them. Any questions? Oh, looks like. Nope.
Sneaking out.
Well, it's, a question?
Maybe I can just yell the
Yes.
question.
Okay.
I'm curious, John Doyle, you said some things are very culturally sensitive, and I'd like to know a little more about what you have in mind when you say that.
Well, we're reluctant to identify items because we don't want to call that bad stuff into our lives. And so sometimes when we are that way, there's issues that maybe aren't addressed because of that caution. you know, we're cautious about sharing that knowledge also, because we don't know where it's going to go or how it will be used or misinterpreted. We have a long history of that kind of life, so, and the relationships that when we share, we do that cautiously. But we also are aware that we don't want to call bad things into our community also.
Yes.
Thank you. I just think, I mean, while sitting down listening, I was reflecting on what comes out of the recommendations of this conference. How does the UNC takes these recommendations further? And because the issue is with the politicians, it doesn't stay with the practitioners, you know, or the academia. But the issue is how does the UNC take these recommendations further to the attention of the politicians? You know, what advocacy tools, what advocacy methodologies, I mean, do have to adopt, you know, in resolving this? Because it's not enough to just come out and discuss the issues, make conclusions or recommendations, you know, but making those things relevant so that maybe in another 5 years when we gather here, we won't be discussing the same issues, but maybe progress on those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I have a question, actually. So when engaging in research with your communities, I'm a professor here at UNC, and we can't do anything without funding, and it's very difficult for us to get funding. It takes an enormous amount of work to put together a grant proposal that has any chance of success. I mean, I'm talking, you know, 6 weeks, probably full-time equivalent work. And without the grant funding, we can't support our students, we can't do the research, you know, we can't come to communities and try to work with you. And every proposal we put in after that big investment is still like entering the lottery. You know, it's like you've just gone and bought a lottery ticket. And it's, you know, very low chances of success these days. And so it can be really difficult to work with communities because they may not understand that when we come and try to work with them to get funding to address their needs, it is just so hard to get money, and communities then get discouraged. You know, they work with us, they put in a lot of effort, we put in a lot of effort, and the grant doesn't come through. We try again, it doesn't come through, and you know, 2 or 3 strikes and you're out. I'm just wondering if you have any advice on working with communities to kind of help them understand that we want with all our hearts for this to work out, but sometimes the funding just doesn't come through, and then we really are stuck as academics. Have any advice for us?
I would say, and I think that Mari and John's relationship's really, really good, is there's a tribal college network out there. And I think there's also professors that are interested in getting research, but I think at the tribal college level, they're focused on more teaching than research. And so they would be potentially a really good partner that would have ties to the community.
Yeah, I would second that. I think it's much easier to work with a community by starting with a tribal college, and also that tribal colleges have access to some funding sources that no one else does, so it's a little less competitive. But keep in mind, then the tribal college is the primary awardee, and you would be a sub-awardee. And really, it'll be up to the tribal college to structure it. But so a lot of what we do is the tribal college is the primary awardee. But it is, yes, it's difficult. I don't think I have any other easy answers to that.
Yeah, I feel your pain. I get things from grants.gov. I read it every single day, trying to find some grant that we could use to help promote our programs. so I know what you're going through. It's not easy. You work hard, like you say, you expend 6 weeks' time on something, and then it doesn't get funded. So how to work with communities, you'll just have to tell the communities that what the chances are of getting funded, and let them know that if we don't do this, you're not going to get funded. You're not going to win the Powerball or Mega Millions if you don't buy a ticket, okay? You have to buy a ticket. So going through this process is like buying the ticket, but your chances are a lot better than winning the Powerball or Mega Millions.
And I think one thing too is if you have a community in mind, to find a community champion, because they'll also be passionate about the issue and the research, and they can kind of be your guide through the community. And so that could be another mechanism.
I also agree that it is very difficult, and we are reoccurring visitors at the grant writers course, and we spend a lot of time gathering statistics and developing wonderful stories, narratives of how successes that we've seen, and same as you, every year, you know, keeping our fingers crossed that grant application that we've spent so much time on will come through. I know Steve and I are both departing tomorrow to go back and write fiscal year-end grant reports. So we're never just doing our job. We're always documenting the grant writing process or the grant reporting process.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, good.
Yes, I just want to commend you. This was an excellent panel, excellent discussion. The balance on the panel was terrific. I am here by surprise, but I learned a lot. The one thing I'm struck with is, aside from the things I didn't know, which were a lot, I'm struck that the federal government has such responsibility, but your demands or your requests were so low. That's only my reaction. Maybe you've been beaten down because you've asked for things in the past and it's always been said no. But even the funding, which I thought would be a really big piece of this, it was minor. Thank you.
I think of it more as a collaborative effort with the federal government. What we do for tribes is so important, and the federal government, their responsibility is so important that we have to do it together. We all have to work together, and so that works for our organization very well.
Hi, my name's Nina Hall. I'm from the University of Queensland in Australia, and the work I'm presenting here is around remote Indigenous communities in Australia and issues around WASH. So I just learnt so much from being here. I really valued this panel. I have two questions, and I'm aware they're kind of big questions, so see how you go. I know we're out of time now. The first one is about remote locations. So many of the Australian communities that I look at, we have hundreds of locations, very small populations. And so what kind of technologies that are decentralised have you found that work well in those communities? My other big question is the acronym of WASH, water, sanitation and hygiene. You talked a lot about water and sanitation. The hygiene dimension doesn't always come when the technology and infrastructure is there. There's lots of reasons for hygiene-related infections. And I would love to hear about solutions, successes in the communities you've worked with.
I love both your questions, so I'm going to start. So part of the National Tribal Water Centers, we were working with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and they work primarily, well, they only work in Alaska. And the communities up there, a lot of them are unserved, but they've been doing research and developing in-home systems. And so one system's the portable alternative sanitation system, and it uses rainwater that's captured, but then also has the treatment and a treatment mechanism inside, and also uses like composting toilets. And so it's in this village of Kivalina, which is being impacted by climate change. So they can't build a centralized system because eventually this island is going to erode and be washed away, and so they can't get funding, to build infrastructure that's just going to be destroyed. So we've been working with the community there, and what we've found is that the systems are, they use less water, but they use water from various sources. And I know John and Mari have talked about water from various sources for various purposes. And so we look at diversifying the water to like drinking water, and then also the water that's used for flushing the toilet or doing the washing. So I'd be happy to talk with you after and share some more information about the PASS system that we're piloting in Kivalina. And your second question about hygiene, we love creating teachable moments through the use of culture and art. And so a lot of times we partner these projects, and we call it the Water is Life project, with any type of infrastructure upgrades. But we celebrate the culture through art and murals on water storage tanks and in community buildings. But what that creates is teachable moments where you can talk about WASH and talk about the hygiene component of it, and meet with kids in the schools, and use that opportunity to give tours of the treatment plant to the school children. And it just creates a positive atmosphere and opportunity to interact with the community. We've also found that when the community's excited, the tribal council's excited. And a lot of times those are the folks that we need at the meetings. They need to hear kind of what the goals are and what their role is. In one community in Russian Mission, Alaska, their system was in the red, and so I think they were like 80 grand in the hole. And we went and, also their fees, I think their water bills were around $196 a month for water and sanitation. And so this is in a remote village in northern Alaska. They're primarily subsistence, and so they hunt for their food, and that's what they eat. And there's a few jobs in the community, but not really. So to have nearly a $200 a month water bill, it's just unsustainable. So we went and we did the Water is Life project, and we met with the kids, and we had a big celebration, but it created momentum around water, and the tribal council then voted to subsidize the water system with a tax that they were charging at the local store. And so that brought the water bill down to, I think it's like close to $80. And so it reduced the amount, and now the community's system is, I think they're up 200 grand. And so they're planning for the future. So it's, I think when you can get an audience and inspire communities on a community level, you can also inspire the leadership that can create sustainable change. And also create teachable moments, so, yeah.
We started teaching hygiene at our Tribal Utility Summit. We have a very good epidemiologist in our tribal health public support system that we have that came down and did an hour-long presentation mainly for wastewater treatment operators. And we actually had some operators get up and walk out and go wash their hands because they hadn't been doing it correctly. And she just gave a safety training at Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians last week on the same subject.
So I'm not sure in Australia if you're in a similar situation, but one of the things that we pointed out today was that we do have access, availability to money for building infrastructure, but we lack money for operation and maintenance. So automation of water utilities and wastewater utilities has been one of the answers for remote communities. And by automating, then I even have tribal operators that have found catastrophic leaks on Sunday morning sitting at the house because they looked at their cell phone and they could tell what the operation of the system was. So I think automation is key.
All right.
Sorry, I know we're running out of time. I'm Katie Fullerton with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I work in the infectious disease group, and the way that we think about advocacy is to document how much disease is happening in a population. And I know there are gaps related to how well we're potentially documenting within Indian country and surveillance. But my question's related to any insight you may have to the utility of talking about disease as a marker for what needs to happen or as an advocacy tool. I didn't really see, there was kind of, at the beginning a presentation of as the sanitation was going up, the disease is going down, but I wonder if, just talking about the amount of GI illness in a population, is that something that the community would be open to? Is that something that would be worth talking about? Is it worth trying to get that data at a community level within tribes so that it can be used as an advocacy tool? Because that's kind of our default in the rest of the country. We talk about rates of disease and how much there is, and 1 in 6 people get X disease, and therefore we need X money to prevent that disease, as opposed to what we need on the infrastructure side and preparing things. Just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, as far as the data collection portion, I know we typically won't go in and ask questions because we'll have to go through the IRB process and all of that, but we can access health records. And so specifically with the PASS system, what we're beginning to do is, because we're looking in the next 2 years to kind of ramp up and provide the whole community with these systems, is we're getting the health data from the clinic. And so some of the health records, and so that's what we'll be sifting through. I don't know, you probably already have access to that, so I don't know if that's...
You'd be surprised, probably not.
But that's what we're looking at, is pre and post evaluations.
I'd like to add something to that. We tried asking the Indian Health Service for that data, and they came back with these incredibly high rates of all these cancers. We went, oh my God, And then it turned out they had no epidemiologist to crunch the numbers, and what they gave us was the number of individual doctor visits for cancer, and they couldn't even tell us they couldn't tell us the prevalence rates in their region. And either they don't have funding for an epidemiologist, or I don't know why, but there is a gap there, and that the data isn't even being put together.
Okay.
So even if they wanted to share it, there's no one doing that work.
Okay, good to know. Thanks.
All right, well, there's no other questions. Thank you all for coming.